Hi, and thanks for such a warm welcome, and thank you to everyone that's taken the time out of your day today to listen to my talk. Today I'll be covering the importance of having a cybersecurity incident response plan. So we've already covered off a little bit about who I am, but just to go over that, my name's Ste Watts and I lead a fantastic team here at Aldermore Group. My team covers cyber defence and incident response, attack surface management and also cyber threat intelligence. I've worked at a number of previous companies covering a number of different functions and roles, so I won't go into all those details, they're there on the screen for you. But I think we should just dive right into it and start talking about incident response. The most important thing is to have a plan. Now that seems really obvious, but according to a recent survey, 77% of respondents said that they lack a formal incident response plan that's applied consistently across their organisation. And worse than that, still nearly half say their plan is informal or actually they don't have one at all. So in most instances, having something is better than nothing, so definitely prioritise putting a basic plan together and strive for progress, not perfection. That's sometimes what happens is people say, I don't have enough time to sit down and put together a big document, so I'll end up doing nothing. So put that time aside and start putting something together. If you are stuck, there are plenty of open source playbooks available. You can go to incidentresponse.org, for example, and there's lots of different playbooks that you can look at on that website. And there's also companies like Microsoft and Amazon who have got specific playbooks that cover common security incidents in Azure and AWS as well. Okay. Outside of that, outside of those available templates, where would you start if you want to put your own plan together? So my recommendation is to choose an incident response lifecycle, one that suits your business and your way of working. There are a number out there. So you've got the SANS incident response lifecycle, you've got NIST, and you've got UDA that you can use as well. What's on the screen at the moment is actually the SANS incident response lifecycle, and we'll be diving into this into more detail as the presentation unfolds. As you can see there, it's broken down into those main areas: preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. Now, sometimes people think that this goes without saying, but I also add to my diagrams a separate element, and this is around communication. And this is really to call out the fact that a well-run incident is only going to be a well-run incident if you communicate and you can communicate effectively. And possibly one of the most important elements of the incident response lifecycle, again, it should go without saying, but this is care. This is taking care of the teams that are involved in the response, to make sure that they're kept comfortable, they don't burn out, and that they can perform their best all the way through. So now we'll dive into the individual parts of the life cycle in a little bit more detail. So firstly, we've got preparation. Preparation is obviously key. We want to make sure that we do as much up front as we can before an incident occurs to put ourselves, best foot forward. So first thing is to assume breach. Assume that at some point an incident may occur within your organisation. So yes, everybody's got shiny technology, AV solutions, principles of defence in depth, event logging. Everyone's got full event logging switched on, right? All those things, but so have the best companies in the world, and we still hear of them getting breached. So don't assume either that you're too small or you're not interesting to attackers. You could, instead of being directly targeted, you could be targeted as collateral damage. You could be hit as collateral damage. We've seen those in types of incidents such as WannaCry. Everybody's familiar with that one, and the recent MoveIt incident as well. So you may not be directly targeted, but you may end up impacted because one of your third parties was hit and now your data is online and you've got a data breach incident that you need to deal with. And you could also be the weakest link in a larger attack in a supply chain. So you are targeted as a stepping stone into the actual ultimate target's environment. So some of the key things we need to think about in preparation is actually knowing your assets, because you obviously can't protect what you can't see. So a good asset inventory and visibility of those assets is key. So know what they are and make sure that they're being patched, the fundamentals basically, make sure they're up to date with antivirus, and that they're being monitored, and you've got visibility through your SIEM and your other monitoring technologies. And the next thing to do once you've got that in place is to establish a baseline of what normal looks like, because this is really going to act as the key way that you can identify those abnormalities within your environment. So things like system resources, what does typical system resources look like, processes on your hosts, those sorts of things. What does average network bandwidth look like in your company, and what might spikes in that look like? What might that tell you? And the other thing is to understand your data, understand where it lives, what type of data your organisation holds, and how that's classified, whether it's stored in emails or file transfer systems, those sorts of things, so that if an incident does occur and you can pinpoint down to which asset, you've got a better idea of understanding just how sensitive the data is that resides on that particular asset. So once you've got a good understanding of the things that you care about, the next thing is to think about the things that pose a threat to your company. So thinking about things like who are the types of threat actors, the types of criminal that may target your company or you may fall victim to one way or another, whether it's through supply chain or direct targeting. So are you somebody that is going to be a primary target for an advanced persistent threat, an APT, or is it more likely that you'll be hit by somebody that's financially motivated through somebody targeting you with ransomware, those types of things? And then the next thing to do is, once you understand who those actors are, break those down into the types of tactics, techniques and procedures that are used by each of those groups. So for example, does the threat actor that you think might target you financially to do some sort of DDoS extortion, for example? So then maybe you'd go and look at your DDoS mitigation protection on your perimeter to make sure that they're in place, and then understand what you would do if those were to actually trigger an alert. And then once you've done that, the next key thing is to put your response plan together. So as I say, once your control does actually trigger and your team has triaged that, then you've confirmed it's actually a true incident, it's not a false positive, then having that overall incident response plan is going to be key. Okay, so do remember though that not all incidents, not all events are incidents. Okay, there may be some things that don't actually warrant stepping up and going into incident response mode. So really important that you have criteria set for what an event is compared to an incident that warrants a full cybersecurity incident response and kicking off that process. Ensure that the plan that you put together covers all of those elements of your chosen life cycle. Make sure you've got something in place as part of going through your document that covers each of those sections. And also very important is make sure that the document, your incident response plan, clearly states who is responsible for which elements of those plans, and make sure that's agreed and signed off up front as well. Don't want people kind of discussing whether or not it's their place to be doing something in the middle of an incident. We want that to already have been kind of sorted out up front. Understand how you're going to call people out. Have you got emergency paging systems to send SMSs? Are you going to send emails? But do bear in mind that obviously depending on the type of incident, some of your key systems may be unavailable. So in the instance of a ransomware attack, Active Directory may be unavailable, meaning that some of your email systems are unavailable. If your SMS system uses some sort of federation with Active Directory, then again that may be missing. So do have a think about out-of-band ways of communication. And while we're on the subject of out-of-band systems, really important that you have a way to access your key plans, your incident response plans, your crisis plans, your contact lists that isn't on the actual network, because again you need to assume that depending on the incident, that particular document, that network may not be available. So also, while we're on the subject of kind of backups and off-site backups, make sure that you do take your backups offline. Make sure they're not available to an attacker that's got admin access to your backup and restoration servers, who may go in and delete anything before they actually roll out ransomware. So make sure that those backups are taken offline and can't be touched by the ransomware actor. And also a good idea to prep firewall containment rules. So make sure you've already got a rule set up on the relevant firewalls to be able to section off parts of your network to keep them contained, keep them isolated so that the incident doesn't spread. Keep those disabled, but obviously in the time of an incident you can go and press that button and very quickly isolate that element of the network without having to do all of the legwork that it would take to actually get that set up from fresh. And I'm also conscious that not everybody has a large team. Some places may only have one person, 1-2 people that would respond to such an attack. So in that instance, It's key that you've already lined up the experts that you need to engage, third parties that can come in and do incident response, cyber forensic specialists, and also take a look at cyber insurance. Some cyber insurance specialists provide third parties as part of those packages who can very quickly, when you engage your cyber insurance in the event of an attack, they can actually help you deploy key personnel either remotely or onto site to help you to respond to that incident in a quicker manner. And then some other areas that I think would be a bit remiss not to talk about, a bit of a contentious one, but there's also have a think about whether or not you may be in a situation where you have to pay the ransom. Obviously not something that I would recommend, as most kind of cybersecurity specialists wouldn't either, but there have been some instances previously where companies have been hit, and had it not been for them paying the ransom, they probably would have gone out of business. So just have a think whether that falls within your risk profile for your business. Have those conversations with your senior leaders. Is this something that we would potentially do? And if so, what are the steps that we need to do to do that up front? So, how would we set up a Bitcoin wallet? Where would that money be transferred from? Would we be able to access it, etc.? And again, this is another key one where you would take on legal advice and advice from a specialist third party, somebody who's already negotiated with threat actors previously, who's already been through a company having to go through this unfortunate part of the process that some people have to go through. And then communication, communication is key. Rather than having to set up your emails in the fog of war in the middle of the incident, highly recommend having some boilerplates set up for both internal communications, whether that's text message communications or out-of-band email, and also external communications to your stakeholders. Again, whether that's your customers, your third parties. If that incident does become, does get into the mainstream media, everybody's going to want to get an update from you as soon as possible. So having something that everybody's signed up to up front that can be populated in the time of an incident is going to get you to that place a lot quicker, a lot easier. And as I say, establish your communication methods, whether that's using SMS to certain stakeholders, whether it's giving call centre scripts for their advisors. If you've still got access to your website, then can you put a website update there, or social media channels, other avenues to explore as well. And also make the assumption that anything that you send internally to your employees may find its way into the press. We've seen previously where that's happened at a number of other organisations, where a screenshot of an email has ended up on Twitter, for example. So just be conscious of those types of things getting into the media. And obviously don't forget, if you are a regulated company, make sure that you're notifying the regulator in accordance with the requirements as well. Okay. Now, the other thing to think about is that sometimes it never rains, but it pours. So, incidents can become complicated. People kind of get stuck in lifts. They can be sick. Your SME can be stuck on that particular day, sick on that particular day. We're working from home a lot of the time, broadband can die. So think about key systems that may be unavailable. Think about key people that may be unavailable, and if there's a third party, a third person that can actually step into their shoes to help out and have that mapped out so that you know kind of where some of your weaker points are. And again, as I say, can't stress enough, make sure that your playbooks, your templates, your key contacts are stored offline. And one of the most important things on this kind of topic of preparation is practice. No plan survives contact with the enemy, as they say. So the more it's practiced, the more likely that it's going to run as you expect it to. So highly recommend doing tabletop exercises or other types of simulations. That could be getting everybody around the table, all the key stakeholders, a cup of tea, a few biscuits, a nice social occasion, and then you run a tabletop exercise. Or it can be something a little bit more realistic, like a red team engagement where it's testing the response and the actual responders are unaware of the fact that it's a test. So key thing with the tabletop exercises is don't just confine it to technical staff, your SecOps team, your IT responders. Make sure that you've got your full range of stakeholders at those tabletop exercises, the comms team, legal, your data protection officer, your risk teams, all the people that are likely to be involved at that time, so that you get a really good run through of what an incident would look like if it was to occur. Okay, so move on to identification. Now sometimes identification is really easy. A user will say that they've clicked on a link, or a website goes offline, or you get a skull and crossbones on the screen. Makes it really easy to establish. But most of the time it's not going to be that easy, and you are going to have to triage and investigate an alert or a number of alerts to see whether or not it's an event, a false positive, or actually if it's an incident that you need to go into the incident management process and actually kick off those practiced processes. So this is often done by looking for deviations from your baseline that we mentioned in the planning phase. So this is looking for things like suspicious activity relating to changes in system resources, new processes being created, or usual ones being killed off, for example. You may see that antivirus suddenly dies on one of your endpoints. That could be suspicious. It could just be a system crash. Reboot will fix it. It could be that somebody's actually tried to kill the EDR or the AV on the endpoint to kind of further their attack. So making sure you've got those event logs is really key. And while you're triaging, obviously you need to try and preserve evidence as much as possible. So sometimes you'll get a lot of good intended people. They'll go and switch a server off because they've seen some malicious or suspicious activity. That could actually destroy evidence, and in some instances it's been known that people have been able to get the likes of ransomware keys back from memory, and obviously you switch off the server and the chances of getting that back is gone basically. So if you're not sure how to respond and kind of preserve evidence in the way that you need to, then that's where your third parties come in that we mentioned before. Call in those experts, ensure that the evidence is handled correctly, especially if it's likely that you're going to be engaging law enforcement. They might want to be able to follow up with some technical evidence to be able to help them investigate the actual crime. Other things we can look for are things like changing file timestamps, closing apps, as I mentioned before. Just make sure that you've already got this level of logging set up prior to actually being in this situation. And another thing to think about is watching for misdirection, the art of illusion. If you've got a DDoS or claims of a website breach and all of your responders go to respond to that, is there something else happening over here out of view? So at that point where you do think you've got a situation, have your head on a pivot, you're looking around, seeing if there's anything else happening in your environment that could indicate a wider attack. Okay, so we've identified the situation, identified what's happening. Next thing is to take that petrol away from the fire, to contain the actual situation and limit any further damage. So key thing that can happen here is that you can be stuck following that white rabbit, going down that rabbit warren. You'll be having a lot of people asking you questions. Make sure you've got somebody whose primary role it is to ensure that containment occurs. We don't want to be trying to answer questions like how did they get in at this stage necessarily, why have they targeted us, or why wasn't the system patched. You need to look at containment, stopping the bleeding, as it were. So make sure that somebody's dedicated to containment, and then also if possible have somebody else that's briefing the executive team or the line manager. Now, again, as I say, whilst your containing actions are taking place, always need to balance that off against forensic acquisition. So if you're pulling a server offline, then make sure you're doing that with a risk-based view. You may be losing evidence, but it may be more important to actually contain that particular attack at that point in time, rather than having any evidence that you can follow up on at a later date. And containment also contains non-technical elements as well. So that could be conducting damage limitation to the company reputation, for example. So this goes back to having those templates, those communications templates, so that if you do start getting media inquiries, rather than the media run away with a story, something could be put out there. You can put a statement out very quickly, and you can be transparent, and that will often serve you better than not having something ready to go out the door sooner rather than later. Okay, so next moved into eradication and recovery. So It goes without saying that, primary thing we need to do in an incident is to get the threat out of your network to prevent them from returning and get back to BAU so you can continue with the business. Key thing here is don't move into recovery until you're confident that the eradication process is complete. You won't believe the amount of times that we hear, through media stories or from speaking to other people, that they start recovering servers and then suddenly they hit again. Those servers go down, they're re-infected, re-compromised, and that's because the eradication process hasn't been complete. So this includes things like removing backdoors, deleting new accounts that have been created, rolling system passwords. That could be on an individual basis, or that could be every account in Active Directory. Really depends on what's come out of your triage and what you know from the incident at that particular time. Rebuilding systems, rebuilding those from scratch in some instances. You might have things like rootkits on there that are very hard to detect, so better safe than sorry. Rebuild from scratch if that's your decision at that point in time. Make sure when they're rebuilt, they're rebuilt and tested as well. So consider obviously penetration testing key services, vulnerability scanning, and making sure everything is patched before it goes back onto the network, goes onto a clean network. And again, if you are lucky enough or you have done enough in the preparation stage to make sure that your backups are held offline, make sure that those clean backups are used to bring your systems back up to date. And as the saying goes, never let a good crisis go to waste. So if there were previously some controls missing or some hardening that could have taken place, use this as an opportunity to go ahead and implement those sooner rather than later. Okay, so lessons learned. Again, a really important element of the life cycle is to do that post-incident review report at the end. Make sure that you review exactly how well your processes ran, if there are any things that need to be fixed, if there are any risks that need to be raised or controls that need to be hardened. Make sure they're captured in the post-incident review report. Make sure they're captured in your risk system as well. And go back and revisit your incident response plan and your playbooks and bring those up to date, filling in any gaps that may have been identified as you actually go through the process. This is a really important one and something that's often underplayed. A lot of people will get to the recovery stage, breathe a well-deserved sigh of relief and go and take a break before they're going back to normal. One of the key things here is make sure that you go back and fill those gaps that you've identified as you've been going through that incident. Okay, and kind of following on from this one, communication. This is, I mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation. Communication is key all the way through, whether that's internal communication, external communication, and communication between your incident response teams. Ensure that your teams are in constant contact. Everybody knows what they're doing. Everybody knows what they've been tasked with. You've not got the expectation that one person is doing something and an hour later you check with them, like they don't understand that was their task. Make sure it's very clear who's working on what the intended outcome is, and when you're going to check in with that particular person. Again, another tip that I mentioned before is having those incident response plans, communication plans already put together, so you can just fill in the key missing pieces if something does happen, rather than having to put those documents together in the middle of what will be potentially a hectic incident. And a key thing is making sure that where you can, you document the incident timeline as you're going by. So ideally, you want a primary incident responder that is, actually looking after the boots on the ground, responding to the incident, giving out kind of the tasking. But then, if you've got enough people in your team, have a secondary incident responder who's capturing all the actions, who's capturing the timeline of the decisions and of the things that were actually identified, so that when you come to your post-incident review, you've got a good timeline as to what decisions were made, by who, why, and when. And then I mentioned one of the other key elements of this is the care aspect. So make sure that if it's going to be a long incident, you've set your team up to be able to rotate between each other, allow for breaks, make sure that everybody's fed and watered. And as part of your incident response document set, I'd highly recommend creating a welfare guide. This is a guide that can give you a lot of pointers as to what elements you need to take into consideration whilst you're running an incident. So this could be things like taking regular breaks, getting taxis instead of driving if people are going to be tired, things like expenses for food and drink, those sorts of things. make sure that all of that is somewhere that's already been signed off. You know, I know a lot of incident responders previously at other companies within the wider industry. People have walked out mid-incident because of too much stress. So really important that we're looking after our staff, especially in these times of crisis. You know, IBM stated that 67% of cybersecurity incident responders have experienced stress or anxiety in their daily lives as a response to responding to an incident. So really important that we're looking after our people that are looking after us. And you know, overall, keep calm and carry on. It may not feel like it at the time, but the incident will eventually come to an end. Make sure that you take time to recognise everybody that's been involved and been committed to getting you back to BAU. You know, those really the people that have been you've depended on to get you back up and running again. So a bit of a summary there. I won't go into each of those details. You can screenshot that from the recording if you'd like to take some more details away. Alternatively, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and Twitter if you'd like to ask me any more questions there, or if you've got anything to follow up on. But outside of that, I hope you found this presentation useful. Hope there's something that is triggered with you that maybe you go back to your organisation and improve your incident response plan. And with that, I'll say thanks very much, thanks for your time, and I'll hand back over.